Hi there, welcome to Gnostic Vlog Confessio 27. Uh, I have not yet done all the things I said I was going to do in the last vlog entry, such as making playlists and finishing my the second part of my book on Grail Gnosticism. I don't know. But I have sort of slowed down a bit on video making, but then I started again yesterday yeah, in introducing my new series on affirmational words and the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is basically my understanding of the Kabbalistic tree of life thus far. Um, but I want to talk about meditation. Recently, I've been a bit more diligent with my meditational practice, my Raja Yoga Sadhana, which means practice. Sadhana means practice. And I mean, I started this many years ago, various forms of meditation undergone. And, but, it's taken a very long time, I suppose. I'm not very good at meditation, I don't think. Whether such a statement makes any sense to say I'm not very good at meditation. Perhaps that's actually a meaningless statement, really. But then tonight, as I record this actually on the Thursday night, uh, I had a very interesting experience actually, and something perhaps of a mini breakthrough, I suppose. And I suppose obtained a result which gives credence to a lot of material that I've read over the years from the Upanishads about the self and about being firmly established in self, which is a phrase that used over and over again in the Upanishads. And I'll have to link this, of course, with some understanding of Gnosticism as well. But I mean, there is a link because the worlds of the demiurge are part and parcel of our perception and of the sensory data. A huge amount of sensory data is coming into us, of course, from outside. But there's also a lot of awareness of our own thoughts and thought processes and desires and fears and worries, positive and negative thoughts, as one might say. And all this sort of is just a massive wad of data coming in and being collated and reacted to on some level or another, and in a creative way, sometimes in a destructive way, sometimes in a preserving way, all part of the world of the demiurge. So this is the world. The world is basically as we perceive it. The world is as we process the sensory data that's coming into us. And if you know anything about sensory, the whole theory of psychology is that our sensory data creates a sort of almost creates a circle, and then the psychology, our various psychological process complete the process, kind of join the two sides of the circle together to create a whole sensory experience. But much of that sensory experience is not raw data coming in from the five senses. It's actually completed by perceptual tricks that are conducted in the various cortices of the brain. So far, so good. And sometimes we are aware. We are aware of ourselves to the extent that we are aware of our reactions to things. We are aware that we're engrossed in something. We are aware that we are reacting positively or negatively to some situation or person or idea that's swirling around in our heads. And to that extent, very briefly, we are aware that there is some core to ourselves that is uh, taking part in something which is outside of itself, as it were. And yet, most of the time, this self is intimately connected with everything that's happening in the world. So you could say that the self is created by what is happening in the world and what we are detecting that is going on in the world. So I have an idea connected, involved sense of self, involved in the senses, involved in emotions and cognitions of various kinds on various levels and all that. Um, and I call this a normal, by which I mean usual consciousness. So our usual consciousness is completely focused on the world, either fully engrossed in the world, or sort of involved in the world in a kind of casual sort of way, but certainly in a reactive way. It feels like a sort of charge, a sort of mental, where it's kind of like as if the world was a sort of electric charge. And we are detecting this electric charge, and this electric charge is completely overwhelming us, completely involving us. So we're either going sort of ouch, or the way that's nice, or nice or nasty. We're totally involved in the world, and we're sort of worldly in that sense of the word, worldly. And we may be trying to manipulate and scheme about things, trying to improve our worldly situation. But even if we're not doing that, we are certainly normally or usually completely involved in everything that we are sensing and in everything that we are thinking, and everything that we are perceiving. And so but after many years of meditation, or perhaps not long after you start meditation, there's such a thing as beginner's luck. You notice this almost straight away. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But you suddenly become aware that the world, this is, if you can imagine, this circle is like a sphere. And there's some point in this sphere where your consciousness is. I mean, it doesn't have to be the center, it could be anywhere. It's sort of bobbing about, actually, all over the place, in fact, being pushed and pulled this way and that by every thought and every passing piece of sensory data that's going around. So you're being pushed around. So this little dot is sort of flying around the place like a mad thing. Um, but after some time meditation, this little dot settles down, and then suddenly it is as if the world sort of rolls out into a flat plane. Instead of being a sphere, it becomes like a flat plane, like a screen, like on those big movie screens. There's massive, there's cinemas with the massive screens, if you remember them. If we're ever going to go back to them. I don't know. Are we ever going to go to the cinema again? I make this entry on this particular date when COVID-19 seems to be ruling all that kind of fun out for everybody. Can't go to the cinema anymore. Anyway, but in the days when you could, there's massive screens, 40-foot screens, and a movie is playing on the screen, and you're sitting in the movie watching the screen. And this is what happens in your mind. Suddenly the sphere of your mind becomes a flat screen. And then suddenly, you are sort of observing the things that are going on in the movie house, as it were, but you're completely disconnected. You're no longer actually there in the midst of it all. You're completely separate from it. And you may say, "Oh, this sounds a bit creepy," but there's all your sensory data, and there's you just observing this sensory data, all these thoughts that are passing through your mind, rising and falling, and you are no longer part of it. You have become this self that is observing the things that are going on in your mind. And I call this self-referring as well, because that's part one. And the part two of this process is when you sort of become aware that you are a self separate from everything that's going on in your mind, which is kind of a strange sensation, but it's a very beautiful sensation. I mean, the first thing, but there are three phases really. First phase is that you become very relaxed. Okay, you're very calm. The second phase is that you become aware that you're observing everything that's going on in your mind and outside your mind, And thirdly, you become it becomes a very lovely sensation, a feeling of freedom, and a feeling neutrality. So there's no longer any charge attached to any of the things that you're thinking or sensing. It becomes like yourself becomes its very self. You kind of self-referring, and that's the third stage. Usually, when that happens, unfortunately, you get pushed back into the sphere. You get pushed back into the midst of everything that you're thinking and perceiving and sensing, unfortunately. So there's sort of an arrow goes from this blissful state straight back into the sphere of the mind again. But you become aware, so you become relaxed, you're chilled out, and then you become relaxed of this observing self, and then you become self-referring, so you're aware of the great bliss attached to this self, which is separate from the world, and then that usually pushes you back into the midst of your mind again. So, for example, let's give a concrete example. There are many things which you can become aware of, like aware of the breath, aware of your mind, aware of your body, sitting in a chair or sitting in a yoga posture or something like that. Um, but I was kind of aware of the traffic going past my window, because the sound of traffic is quite loud, and lots of lorries and trucks and cars going whizzing past, right? Um, and even though I'm in the countryside, I don't know, the countryside is pretty noisy, really. Anyway, well, this is a main road, I suppose, so you can hardly blame it. But I was just listening to this traffic going past, and it suddenly, like, it was as if I wasn't there. Well, I was there, but I was observing myself listening to the traffic, if that makes any sense. So there was traffic noise, right, coming into me, and I could hear the traffic, okay, because I wasn't deaf, okay, and it wasn't that I was not conscious of the traffic. I was conscious, but I was simply aware of myself. I was kind of, a part of me was observing this other part of me, which was listening to this truck that was trundling past the window, right? And at that point, it was like I was no longer sort of, I was there, but I wasn't there. But then I felt that suddenly I felt like I was going back into the sphere of the mind, and suddenly, I was thinking, oh, that's a rattly truck, or that's kind of trucks making a lot of noise, isn't it? And disturbing my peace, and that's not right, and all this. So then I was flung back into my usual normal consciousness, which is judgmental and reactive, and blah blah blah. But for an instant there, and when I was sort of thrown back into my normal or usual consciousness, it felt like, as I say, it felt like a sort of charge. It felt like the sound of the truck passing the window um, was sort of pulling me into it, and making me sort of buzzy, as it were. Myself was sort of buzzing with thoughts about the truck. Whereas an instant before, the sound of the truck was neutral, totally neutral, and there was like a sort of zero, a void. And the sound was there, all right. The truck, was passing the window. I could detect that with my ears and my auditory cortex of my mind, of my brain. But I was simply observing the process of hearing the sound of the truck, but I wasn't involved in it in any way, shape, or form. And this suddenly gave rise to the consciousness or awareness of self. And as the Upanishads say, being firmly established in self is kind of like it's a separate self, separate from the world, separate from my mind. Because if this sphere that I've talked about is the world, which is also my mind. There's the world, like the W of the world, and if you turn that W into M, mind world. but they're both sort of a continuum, basically, aren't they? I mean, there's atoms and there's molecules and electrons, which is the world, and then there's my mind, which is detecting all these different quantum phenomena, which comprise the worlds. I mean, I know I'm going sort of off scale a bit here because suddenly I'm talking about the world and the planet, and then I'm talking about quantum phenomena, which is a bit of a jump, really. But my mind is part of this quantum world, and two sides of the same coin. But then my consciousness is there, looking at the quantum phenomena, and looking at my mind, which is looking at the quantum phenomena, if you see what I mean. So suddenly there's a third element where there was just two, with the world and my mind. Suddenly there is a third element, which is myself, looking at my mind, which is looking at the world. And it was a beautiful feeling because, as I said, there is no charge. It's just totally neutral. There is no. It's more than just being relaxed, because you could be relaxed. You know what I mean? Or as you're just about going to sleep at night, you can sort of be relaxed in a relaxed state just before you're nodding off. But it's not that, because I was fully alert. I'm sitting in the chair. I'm listening to things. I'm listening to, aware of my breathing. I'm aware of various aches and pains in my body and things like that. But it doesn't matter. There's a neutrality associated with all this sensory data, and none of it matters. So in that sense, I've created a metaphysics which transcends the matter-mind complex, as it were, and I've sort of instantly created this self, which is truly transcendental, of the world. I know that sounds a bit sort of sophistic of me to say that, but it seemed to me like a very real phenomena that you have this self bobbing about, quite free of the world, and the world has become a flat screen which is being watched by the self, which is totally liberated, which is not part of this flat screen. And when you look at a movie, you watch a movie in a cinema. You are sitting in your chair, and sometimes you can become aware of the people around you. You could become aware of yourself sitting in the chair, that the seat is a bit hard or whatever, not very comfortable, or that you're holding something in your hand. And you sort of go back and forth. Sometimes you're concentrated on the movie, sometimes you're concentrated on the cinema, or the person sitting beside you, or in front of you, or behind you, or something like that. It kind of switches from one to the other. And I found that in meditation, you kind of switch from this observing consciousness, to this usual consciousness. It kind of goes from 1 to 0. 1 is the usual consciousness. 0 is the observing consciousness, and you go from 1 to 0 and 0 to 1. The sort of dynamic kind of dance between the two states of consciousness, as it were. But the important thing, from the Gnostic point of view, is the fact that when you're in the 0 state, the observing consciousness state, it is very, very. It feels like transcendental. It feels. If the word transcendental is based on something, on an actual experience, then that experience is what the word transcendental will be based on. Okay, so that's where we get this idea of transcendence, is from this strange experience that was out of meditation. And sometimes it was out of prayer or fasting, or loads of other things can get you into this observing state. It isn't just meditation. And sometimes even high degrees of stress can get you to the same place as well. And certainly different forms of trance and through ritual and things like that. Anyway, so I just thought I'd park it there. I mean, people that are obviously watching this channel, you're probably very, very aware of this, and you probably have experienced this observing consciousness a lot in your meditation. And I mean, I don't really know what it means. I suppose the final stage is to experience some sort of meaning, which may arise from this peculiar phenomenon. So you have this phenomenon of the observing consciousness, But what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it point to? What does this phenomena point to? Is it something which is just a neurological trick, just a trick of the mind, or does it point to some sort of metaphysical reality? That's where everybody starts to argue and get a bit shirty about it, and that's when we sort of start to argue with each other about it. But in any case, it really doesn't matter because it's so nice. This observing consciousness, this self-referring self, the self that's referred to in the Upanishads, is just so nice. It's a lovely state to be in. So whether or not it points to any metaphysical reality is neither here nor there, quite frankly, because when you're actually in meditation, you don't really ask that kind of question. You don't ask metaphysical questions, and indeed, if you did, you'd be plunged right back into where you started from, which is this kind of worldliness, as it were, which is kind of ironic, really. The metaphysical questions almost get us back to where we were before, which is completely immersed in the world, which is kind of strange. So I think there are not intellectual questions which can be asked during meditation that can be answered, because as soon as you answer them, then you're no longer in the meditative state. You're back in your normal consciousness. That's the problem, really. And intellectuals don't like that, and therefore they kind of say, well, meditation doesn't really prove anything, and so it doesn't prove anything. Perhaps there's nothing there to prove. It doesn't really matter, does it? It's just a lovely experience. So, keep doing your spiritual exercises. And keep experiencing this. It's fascinating to observe the self-referring self, which is observing everything that's going on in the mind. It's extraordinarily interesting. Even though that thought this is interesting, then destroys the wonderful moment, of course, because then you go back to where you were before. Anyway, I thought I'd just leave this little bit of little snippet from my meditation practice. And if you wish to compare notes on this basis, do so.